Well, that definitely didn't make it in the trailer. Hey, thank you for joining the Escape With Me book club. Escape with me, Sam Reiner.
And me, Tim Bergman.
Into our most recent read, come with us as we evade reality and go into detail about a new book. We'll be covering the book from beginning to end, so there will be spoilers. Today we are going to unspecified farmland, as we tend to do, apparently. Published June 1st, 1970, Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH was later adopted into the beloved 1982 movie classic, The Secrets of NIHM. I know it was beloved because every time I had a what is happening face, my husband would scream, "This is a beloved children's movie!"
This movie is a cult classic.
It is. It's John Bluth, but it was so funny because I was going to end up watching it myself at work while I was doing something. And he's like, "No, let's sit down and watch it together." And it was just such a funny give and take the entire movie of me being like, what is even happening? And him being like, "You have to love it."
Yeah.
This is childhood, Sam.
Yeah. For as many people are deeply freaked out when they remember this movie, it seems sacrilegious to criticize it in any way.
Well, here I am, ruining childhoods and adulthoods the same. But why was this book chosen for adaptation? And what even is NIMH? Fun fact, that is the National Institute of Mental Health, which begs the question, why are you giving rats immortality? I understand you're making them more intelligent. Anyway, steroid portion of the experiment aside, this was a you pick.
Yep.
Once again, I did not know this was a book until you were like, "Hey, there's a book." I think I have seen the movie in that I've seen a lot of children's movies, but I barely remember it. I kind of remember the mom. But other than that, I basically walked into it never seeing the film ever. So you also brought this to my attention, which is kind of crazy because I've seen so many Land Before Time movies. But the Bluth-isms aside, why did you pick? Go ahead.
So I think I finally found my niche in this podcast in horrible things happening to tiny fuzzy creatures.
We have just taken the farm animals market from the 70s and 80s, and we're like, let's find all of the movies, or all of the books that have to do with a lot of mice. We got rabbits, we got a unicorn, but a lot of mice at this point.
A lot of mice. And so I was looking through like old movies and I was like, hey, at some point, Disney and a bunch of independent film people all decided all at once, hey, sometime between 1970 and 1999, let's just make as many movies about mice as possible. All of them loosely based off the books.
I did not realize how many classic Disney movies are based on books. I found out that Mary Poppins was a book series.
No kidding.
Yes. And if you haven't seen Saving Mr. Banks, it's a very good movie. It is about the background of it and how the author did not want Disney to get the rights to the book to make the movie. And it's just like a whole thing. It's very good, though. So Mary Poppins, obviously, Peter Pan, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Snow White, all books. Well, stories. But you made me start doubting things. I looked up so many classic movies. 101 Dalmatians is based on a book. The book is like 100 pages long, but it's still based on a book. So many of those classic movies where it's like, this is a fun concept. All of them were books.
I think we make fun of a lot of Disney executives like, you guys have no original ideas. And well,
they never did.
Everything they did in the past was already there.
They never did. None of them.
Yep, all based off something. An original animated movie.
Is a lie.
Yep.
I'm going to turn around and Wreck-It Ralph has a book.
You know, it's weird. They do that in reverse now. First they have the movie, and then they have the book, the novelization afterward.
Oh my gosh, don't even get me started on how many Frozen books exist in the world. There are so many.
Yeah, let it go.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So we have carved out a very interesting niche for ourselves. This age level for this, children still. I can actually legitimately say this is a children's book versus some of the other ones where we're like, no, you're a child. That being said, there's a small content warning of death of the parent/spouse mentioned. She's a single mom. You get a very good vibe that she's a single mom. There is animal cruelty and death and kidnapping, as you do. It's the human's fault, so it's not the little cute mouse's fault. Or the rats. The rats are the good guys.
Yeah, I wanted to wait a little while before I mentioned this, but the rats, for the first time in probably one of any books I've read, the rats are protagonists. The rats are the good guys.
Yeah, it's a very interesting juxtaposition to put next to Redwall, because in that one, the lead villain is a rat with an eye patch. And then you come into this book, and the lead good guy is a rat with an eye patch. Talk about balance. Let's go. I'm all for inclusivity. People that can have eye patches.
Yeah.
That doesn't make them evil. It's just a thing. Oh my gosh. But to judge a book by its cover, I never know with these covers. It's beige. Maybe it's supposed to be white, but it looks beige, the copy I had. And then it has a drawing of a mouse looking through a hole in a fence and looking at a farmer plowing. And so I was like, cool, it's Watership Down, but mice.
Yeah, if you want a trip, go online and look at all the covers. This book has been republished so many times, and they got a different illustrator for every single one.
That's just going to be facts for all of the books we do. But first of all, I want to say, I was kind of right. But what I actually want to talk about here is the back cover. I don't know why it was drawn like this. It is a scene of Mr. Ages on the left talking with someone sitting on a block, which I think is Mrs. Frisby. But for some reason, Mr. Ages has a pupil.
And she doesn't. Yeah, that freaked me out too.
It's just blank. Did you forget something? So I thought there was going to be a little bit of possession based on the back of the book.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and they didn't have any specifically gendered clothing. Where's the little bow to let us know which one is female?
And the only reason I say the left is Mr. Ages is because it's a white mouse and the one on the right has shading. So Mrs. Frisby gets a little possessed at one point. It's fine. It's good. It's all good. But yes, it is Watership Down, but for mice. Their home is going to be destroyed by those gosh darn humans. And they need to move their house somewhere else so they can be safe. But unlike Watership Down, where they were going to build houses and stuff, this is a farm. This happens every year. It's cyclical. The farmers feel more like a natural disaster in that it's bad for them, but it's part of life. We have to deal with that every year. It's cyclical. There's a season for it. And you just do what you got to do to get past it. So they're not the villains. Like the Watership Down, where the property developers were the villains. It just feels more inevitable. But her kid's sick, he's got pneumonia, and he has to stay in bed for 3 months or he's going to die. Just facts.
Yep.
And she's freaking out because the farmer is about to plow the field. And when he plows the field, he destroys all the homes of creatures that bedded down for the winter. So that's our whole thing, is a mom is worried about her sick child. Can we talk about how cool it is that this story, the main character is a mom?
Yeah, and it's the one thing I liked about the movie, and an audience will talk about that later, is just how mom-like she felt.
Yeah. That's just so cool for a children's book, because even growing up, like, think about Disney shows. That's my equivalent to 80s rodent fiction. But all of them were a large part just the kids doing stuff. And if the parents show up ever, as in they actually had to pay an adult to be on set, they were just kind of a hindrance to the, oh, no, you're not cool, whatever. And there's a couple of shows I can think of to give away our ages, but there's a show called Good Luck Charlie. And one of the things the show specifically does is give the parents plot lines to be like, hey, they're parents, but they're also people. They actually do stuff. They have a life. They're not just mom and dad in the background. And so I thought that was really cool. I think that's cool in this book. I think kids should have fiction where it's like, hey, parents, moms, and dads are people too, to help them empathize with them and be like, oh, they're not just the background to my story or whatever. They're real people with their own ambitions and thoughts and feelings and stuff. I don't know. I think that's pretty cool. I can't really think of a children's book where the main character is a mom.
Not a children's book, no.
Yeah.
And especially a single mom.
Yeah.
Sometimes I like to have them in pairs, and I know Disney likes to kill off all of their moms.
Pixar, specifically.
Pixar, that's right.
It was pretty cool. I'm even looking at my bookshelf over there. I really can't think of a fantasy book. I'm sure there are. I'm absolutely sure there are. But for the most part, once you're a mom, you're not cool. You're a background character to everyone else's story. Like, ew, gross, you're old. So I like it.
Yep. And she was definitely heroic in this.
She was cool. She was smart. She was resourceful. She was still a good mom, even though I kind of like that the movie retconned the children being alone, because I got the vibe that the two older kids were older and were able to watch the younger two babysitting and stuff. But the movie made the other mice really young, and so they're like, okay, the shrew is going to be the babysitter. We can't just leave these guys.
And this wasn't the era of helicopter parenting. This was kind of the era of, hey, Mom, I'm going to go down 5 miles to the creek to go fish. And it's like, okay, be home before the lights turn on.
Yeah, this was before milk carton kids, So
Miss Frisby has a sick child.
The sick child, he's really sick. If he moves, he dies.
Little Timothy.
But the tractor is coming. Thankfully, it's broken. And it'll be 3 days. And so she's like, crap, I have 3 days. So she's not sure what to do, runs into a crow. Crow saw a shiny piece of tinsel. There is a little bit of humans are bad. Tinsel being an example. Oh, it's from Christmas trees. Like they put them all everywhere and then they just fall on the ground and stuff. And it attacks poor innocent crows. He saw a shiny thing. He was trying to pick it up for his lady friend, which I like how subtle they were and how subtle Mrs. Frisby was. Because he says, oh, this isn't for me. I don't really like shiny things. This is for a friend. And she's like,
I getcha.
Is your friend a girl? And he's like, yes. And she's like, interesting. And everyone's like, ooh, he's got a girlfriend. Anyway, he's stuck in tinsel and the cat's coming for him. So she goes out of her way to save him. And he's like, cool. If you ever need a favor, ever, just ask any crow for Jeremy and we'll figure this out.
And for those listening at home, we are now 3 for 3 for small fuzzy animals helping a bird in need.
Okay, just to get this part of the movie out of the way, I like Jeremy in the book a lot.
Oh, yeah. He has such a small part.
He's not my favorite. This is the first time he doesn't get a weird accent. Watership Down did. But yeah, and even in Redwall, they had an accent. So this is the first time a bird does not have an accent. Technically, the owl didn't have an accent, but the bird that was trying to kill him. So is that 2.5? Because the bird did not try to kill her before they became friends. A little less feisty.
Less feisty, but she still helped him out.
Still helps him out. Jeremy's cool. He seems like a cool guy. He's really chill.
I really want to know how many mice protagonist books have a bird in need and they help him.
We are going to find out, apparently.
Stay tuned, audience, as we move through every single book, 70s to 90s, finding if mice help birds.
It was just such a trend. I was not expecting as many of them as there are. This is just a whole new genre that's opened up to us. But that being said, she's like, oh, I don't know what to do. And he's like, hey, there's a wise owl. Whenever any of us birds need help, we go and see the wise owl. And she's like, okay, I'll go see the wise owl.
Did we skip Mr. Ages?
Oh, yeah, I did. Mr. Ages is a gray-white furred mouse that apparently is really into herbalism. And he's basically the doctor of this area. She goes there. He's the one that diagnoses with the pneumonia. He's the one who says, hey, here's the powder to make him feel a little bit better, but he needs to stay in there for 3 months. And he is more important later.
Yep, and he was a good friend of Mrs. Frisby's husband in life, Justin. No, not Justin, Jonathan.
There are so many J names in this book.
Yep.
It can get a little confusing.
But a very wise mouse into herbalism.
And who doesn't live in a machine that's about to explode. I don't understand. Anyway.
Yep, and also there is a shrew. The shrew comes in for all of, 2 paragraphs? Kind of like the feisty neighbor.
And is like, hey, the tractor's coming. And she says, Timothy's sick. And she's like, well, that sucks. Anyway, bye.
Yeah, the kind of lean over the fence, tells you the gossip, and kind of chides you as she's doing it kind of neighbor.
This shrew will have a return. She'll have another scene at the end of the book that's very small. But when we were casting the movie...
Goodness gracious.
Bluth picked his 2 favorite voice actors for Jeremy and the shrew, so many scenes with those 2 were added. And like I said, the shrew kind of makes sense. Oh, she's the babysitter now, so we have a couple of scenes with kids, we have a couple of scenes with her. Jeremy literally just pops up every once in a while to cause trouble. He's not helpful ever.
Yeah, and we'll get to the movie, and goodness gracious.
We will, but I just want to say it right now. Jeremy sucks in the movie.
There are so few likable characters in the movie for me. There are 2 in that whole hour and a half. And we get to talk about my favorite moment in the movie, which was about 2/3 in.
Oh, wow. It's a 90-minute movie, too.
Yep. But Miss Frisby, sick kid, goes to Mr. Ages, gets some medicine, helps the crow, talks to the shrew, and has now decided that
she's going to go to see the great owl, even though she's terrified because owls eat mice. 2 for 3, where a mice goes and talks to an owl and hopes it doesn't kill them.
although the last one was a rabbit, so we might actually be 3 for 3 if we get to the next one.
We'll see. I don't think there's a rabbit in this book.
No, there isn't.
There's not. There's a cat named Dragon.
Yep, there's mice and rats and a shrew.
There's a shrew, which we had a lot of shrews last book, too, so it was a little funny.
Yep.
The owl's never given a name. He's just the great owl. She goes there, and she's like, hey, the farmer's coming, and I can't move my son. And he's like, well, you either stay there, and the farmer kills you all, or you move, and you just lose one child, which I noticed they cut out of the movie.
Yeah, he's a very practical fellow, this owl.
He's very pragmatic about it.
Yep. But then
he's like, good day, Mrs. And she's like, Mrs. Frisby. And he says, oh my gosh, Jonathan Frisby? And she's like, yeah?
His name is not unknown in these woods.
Yeah, and so instead he changes his tune, and he's like, go to the rats, tell them to put it, I don't remember the phrasing at this point.
In the lee of the stone. He makes her remember that.
So you need to go talk to Justin and tell him to take you to Nicodemus of the rats in the rose bush. That is not that close to the farmhouse. Goodness. Anyway, movie aside.
Yeah.
It didn't even look like a rose bush.
In the movie, ladies and gentlemen, the rose bush is all of about 10 steps from the front of their house.
It's in their front yard. What? Anyway. Horrible base of operations. So she's like, okay, this is weird, but okay, leaves. Which, by the way, I feel like this is a good point since we're bringing up the name and making it a big idea. Would you like to tell the fun story about why her name was changed for the movie?
Oh boy. So in the movie, it is Miss Brisby. In the book, it's Miss Frisby. And from what I understand, when they were making the movie, some genius thought to himself, hey, we should contact the Frisby company, the kind that makes discs, little flying discs, fun for children and animals, and ask them, hey, it's cool if we have a character named Frisby that's spelled differently, right? And so they sent the letter, and the letter came back with them saying, if you do it, we'll sue you. And so they changed it to Brisby.
Yep.
I feel like if they didn't tell anyone, if they didn't ask, hey, is this okay, then they wouldn't have sued because they wouldn't have thought in the first place, hey, they're trying to make money off of our flying discs.
I'm going to raise your fun story for a fun story. That immediately made me Google when you told me that. I was like, well, when was the Frisbee invented? Theoretically, the 1930s, blah, blah, blah. It was invented, but, the toy company that got it, it was sold by the company in the late 1950s. And originally, here's a fun fact, originally it was called a Pluto platter.
A Pluto platter.
A Pluto platter.
Is this pre or post Planet?
I think, when was...
That's going to require more research.
We're here now. Here's our rabbit hole. When was Pluto discovered? 1930. So yes, Pluto has been a planet for about 20, almost 30 years at this point. So it's originally called a Pluto platter. They ended up changing the name because it's one of the cases where people called it something else for so long and the company just gave up. There's a tradition in New England where you toss around a pie tin, and they would use a company that was based in Connecticut called Frisby Pie Company, but it's spelled Frisbie. And because they kept throwing not the pie tins, but the toy, they kept calling it Frisbees. The Frisbee pie tins. And so they ended up spelling it Frisbee to differentiate themselves. And that's how they became Frisbee. So it's so funny to me that they were going to sue someone over the spelling being Frisby. When they straight up were like, let's change a letter. All right, we're commercially different enough.
Yeah, and the thing is, Frisby is a name. It is people's surname. We knew a Frisby in school.
Yes, that is facts, because it's a last name because they owned a pie company and named it after their family, like the Schmuckers.
Yep.
That's a last name. They just named it after themselves. Yeah, so it is a name. It's real, and that's why they used it.
You better hope nobody takes your name before you get famous.
For real, though. Oh my gosh. But yeah, so that's just a fun fact that they turned around and were like, we'll sue you if you name him Frisby. It's so funny. Bluth could not afford a lawsuit, so I can't blame him for just being like, okay.
Roll with it.
But I legitimately have to wonder how many kids accidentally thought Brisby was Frisby.
Yeah, I mean, the title of the book is Miss Frisby and the Rats of NIMH.
Yeah, and they changed the title to The Secret of NIMH for the movie because rats aren't marketable, I guess. I don't know. It's so funny to me that they just changed one letter. Frisby was like, that's kind of what we did too. Anyway, so now she's going to go meet the rats.
Yep, into the rose bush.
And it's a little bit funny. She goes out into a rose bush. She finds a kind of a doorway on a hinge made out of bush, opens it up, walks down this path. And there's a rat standing guard in front of this opening into the ground. And she goes, oh, hey, Justin, right? I need to see Nicodemus. And he's like, I'm not Justice, I'm Brutus. And she goes, oh, well, is Justin still here? And he's like, yeah, he's at the meeting.
Which you aren't invited to.
Okay, well, can I see Nicodemus anyway? So this girl has name-dropped 2 rats at this point, knows who they are, and is like asking to see them and whatever. And Brutus is just like, nope.
Yeah, puts his foot down, basically just shoos her away.
Unlike the movie where he tries to kill her.
Yeah, I keep on wanting to go into the movie, and it's like, there's a difference between a kind of callous young guard.
Nope.
Who's just putting his foot down. He's too ignorant to know any better.
He's just doing his job.
And straight up, I will crush your skull murder.
It's so unhinged. Villains in that movie are unhinged. Just facts.
But he shoos her away, unlike the murderous movie. And she goes to weep a little bit in the further corner of the cave, closer to the entrance. And who does she meet?
Yeah, she's still in the rose bush. She hasn't left. She's like, I'm just going to wait for Justin. I can't get anywhere with this guy.
Yep.
And then she sees, Mr. Ages.
Mr. Ages.
In a cast. He was not in a cast previously, but he's now in a cast.
Yep.
What? What are you doing here? And Mr. Ages turns around, well, what are you doing here?
Yeah, kind of a mutual question.
Everybody in the valley, I don't know, farmland, think the rats are weird because they're weird.
Yeah, the rats are strange. We stay away from the rats is the general consensus of the rest of the animals.
Our first introduction in the book, and in the movie actually, is Mrs. Brisby in the book sees them. In the movie, we just get to see them do it at night, which is smart. I don't know why they're doing that in broad daylight, but they have a cable extension, like a bit of electric wire.
Like a power cord.
And are marching in a single file line into the rosebush.
And right in front of the cat's nose, too. This fearsome cat named Dragon.
Which I love, especially since we come to find out in Redwall that cats are the sizes of dragons. These authors have to have had read each other. So many connections. Anyway, the point is, they're weird. So it's weird that Mr. Ages is there because he's a mouse. And it's weird that she's there because she's also a mouse. And she goes, well, I was trying to get in, mentions kind of what the owl said. And he's like, oh, they're all at a meeting. The meeting I'm actually supposed to be at. But I'm in a cast, so I'm moving very slowly. So he's like, okay, I'll take you to the meeting. They get back up to the front. Justin's already out there. You get to meet Justin. Justin not dressing up like a toy soldier and then pretending to murder someone. What?
Yeah.
Why? Why would he do that?
And there's no casual flirting between Justin and Miss Frisby.
It is not casual. In the book, I was like, I'm shipping these 2 characters. It's kind of inappropriate, but I'm totally shipping Mrs. Frisby and Justin's a little unfair because, you know, she's widow and she probably loved her husband dearly. It may not be in that place. And I don't even think they flirt, period. I think they just exist in the same space. And my brain is like, oh, you seem cute. If you 2 got together, I wouldn't be mad. I would be actually okay with that.
I think that's been the standard human way of looking at books since like the internet came about and probably a long time before that.
We all have a problem. Ever since shipping became a word, it's gotten out of hand.
Yeah, shipping has been around since like the ship of Theseus.
Although, okay, so they got rid of this character in the movie, and I think that was a good one. There is a very, very young mouse who has a very, very obvious crush on Justin.
Isabella?
It's a little weird because she's like, oh, Isabella's too young to get married, which I have no idea what that is in Rat. a year? What even is that?
I think they wanted to make it look like she was a teenager-ish, somewhere between 13 and 16.
Oh, it depends on what type of rat. Sorry, I'm looking up rat gestation.
I don't think that amount of research went into the book.
I don't know. With Watership Down, he read a whole book about rabbits. Let's see. Okay, so brown rats live for 2 years, but black rats live for 12 months.
And you have to remember, they're immortal. We don't, in the audience, know that yet.
So the original ones are immortal, but the other ones do grow up, but it seems to take longer. Rats can produce after 5 weeks. Fun fact about rats. So I don't know how old she is, but literally the only thing I thought the entire time, anytime she would show up and be obsessive over Justin, I'm like, but how old is Justin? How icked out should I be about this? I was a little worried. They were like, and they're gonna get married. I mean, I'm not a huge fan about Justin Jennings, but I was a little worried it was gonna go that way, and it didn't. And I was like, okay, good. I felt a little uncomfortable about that.
I thought it was kind of funny where, like, it's this teenage crush, but it's a rat.
Yes. And that's how it went. Like I said, I was just worried. I was like, how seriously do I need to take this? After reading the book, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm fine. Teenagers and little kids even get crushes on the weirdest people that are older than them. It happens all the time.
Uh-huh.
Practically part of the developmental stages. But it would be weird if Justin reciprocated. So let me just, and especially after you find out they're immortal.
Yeah.
And now we're going to run into the vampire problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason that comes up later in the story with Frisby's husband, Jonathan.
Yeah, he was going to live forever.
Yeah.
And she was going to die. And her kids were probably going to live longer than they should. But eventually they would die.
Yep. And it is about this point of the book where we get that exact exposition.
Yes, we get a lot of exposition dumps, which work in the book because they end up being scenes, like you actually go back in time and see the scenes and stuff. I'm actually a little annoyed that the movie took out the scientists almost completely.
Yeah, it spent all of, less than 5 minutes where it's like, yeah, we were a bunch of just normal rats, and then they stuck us with a bunch of syringes, and then we learned how to read and escaped, and that's our entire story.
Yeah, I swear they spent more time panning to the monkeys in the movie, which apparently there's monkeys and dogs and rabbits because you're not going to care enough that just rats are there. Let's throw in the monkeys. Let's throw in the little puppies, kids.
Yeah, look at what they do to the beagles. Aren't you sad now?
Little 7-year-old Susie, look at this animal testing. Look, they're going to shoot your beagle.
Let's find out if dogs are bulletproof, but make sure to use puppies. They're softer.
It was just so obviously a emotional pull that I was a little bit like, okay, all right, roll eyes a little bit. How do you get me to roll eyes on animal testing? I watched Legally Blonde. I was on L's side. Anyway.
Goodness gracious. But in the book, they actually take not just one chapter, but quite a few chapters to explain the whole story.
It's a good chunk. And you get to know it, and you get to understand what the scientists are doing, because in the movie, they're just like, oh, and they kidnap animals, and then shoot them with stuff, and then they're miserable and everything. Anyway, we escaped.
In the book, it goes through, it's like, yeah, here's exactly how they tested us. Here's the maze that we went through. Here's how they taught us to read.
Here's who was in the control group.
Because they don't learn instantly. They have to learn over the course of like years or months. It's really unclear.
Literally in the movie, the line is, we grew intelligent. We learned how to read. Moving on. There's just such a throwaway line that they're like, we grew intelligent, we learned to read, moving on, we escaped. Whereas in the book, the scientists taught them to read. The whole point of this experiment was to create intelligent rats. They had 3 different sections, and A, which is our rats over here, were given this one compound, B was given a lesser compound, and C was given nothing. And the A group were showing extremely intelligent through the maze thingy over and over again, to the point they started being like, okay, they're intelligent enough to switch to the steroid, which gave them immortality, ? And even the scientists are like, so all the control group are dead, and basically the B group lived longer, but they're also dead, but these rats have not aged at all. And as we learn, depending on what color they are, and according to the movie, they're brown. So 2 years.
Yeah, they were in there quite a while.
They're in there quite a while. And their breaking out took way more than the movie made it out too, because they had rope, they had to figure out how to get out of their cages, they had to figure out how to get into the air vents. They come to find out there are other mice there, because all they've seen are rats.
Yeah, so this entire time, it's just the scientists are looking at it and like, okay, I want to give rats
super intelligence.
Associate's degrees in engineering.
I want them to learn to read. Who funded this?
I just pictured these men of science from the 1930s, back when everything was super positive, and it's like we could solve everything through the power of industrial science. And it's like, oh, okay, let's do that, but with rats.
Who is funding this research?
And why didn't we use it on humans?
Oh, testing on humans is a whole thing.
I think the rats escaping proves the experiment is successful.
That's kind of the problem. I'm so curious who funded this. I want to read his paper about this. And you kind of get the vibe that he wants an intelligence thing. Because like I said, this is the National Institute of Mental Health. This is all about being smarter. I'm just wondering where the steroids came in to give immortality to rats. I guess that's why I go, that's a step too far. Make them super geniuses, fine. But who's funding immortality? Anyway, beside the point, it's crazy, isn't it?
And about this time, when they are escaping, like at the moment of their escape, they decide to help out some of the other animals that were given the same compound.
Yeah, it's just, it's crazy.
So here's where we finally meet, for the first time in the flesh, living Jonathan the mouse.
Well, living then.
Yeah, and Mr. Ages.
Yes. So Mr. Ages and Jonathan both came from the experiment, but the mouse version? And Jonathan convinces them to let the mice come along. They can't free themselves from their own cages because they're just too small. It's just facts. So they get them, whatever, they help them. And it ends up working out because later something happens where only a small mouse can make it out. They lose the rest of them. There were a good many of them.
But they went through the air ducts and a blast of wind knocked all but Mr. Ages and Jonathan away.
Yeah.
And they just kind of put a pin in that. They never show up again.
No. And he even says, and we never saw them ever again. We have no idea what happened to them.
Yep, put them on a bus, get them out of here. But they escape, and they kind of wander around for a bit until they find a mansion. And the mansion has a bunch of books, and because they learned how to read, they read all of the books.
I don't know whose library this is. It's a very weird library, because they're like, and we learned about electricity and putting things together and mechanics, and this one mouse became an engineer. And they're just like, who owns this library? Do you just have textbooks? I mean, I have textbooks that I have from college and stuff, so I guess if a mouse broke into my house, they'll become salesmen and learn about marketing. I don't know whose library this is.
Yeah, they learned about history too. One of them, I think it was Nicodemus, was like, yes, I read about China and Rome, good civilizations.
Oh yeah, and poetry?
And all of this makes them do some very philosophical questions that actually struck me. If we had developed a civilization of our own, what would it look like?
Yes, because he read this one book because he was trying to learn about rats, but apparently this guy doesn't have any rat books. Like I said, rats aren't marketable.
Not even in universe are rats marketable.
And they look through a bunch of things, and he's trying to find more information about rats. And at one point he finds, oh, rats used to be way more evolutionarily developed than quote-unquote humans, whatever evolutionary ancestor.
We used to dig holes, like prairie dogs. That was their major advancement in the evolutionary step, is digging holes in the ground like ants.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I don't know why that was so funny, but I was just like over here talking about rat books, and you're like, we used to dig holes. And I don't know why that was so funny.
Well, it struck him.
It struck him.
It struck Nicodemus, and he was like, oh, our great ancestors, the rat version of cavemen.
Yeah, he was like, we had advanced civilizations, and we evolved, in that branch of rats, evolved into the prairie dogs. But then the prairie dogs had it too easy, so obviously they became complacent, and then humans came into existence and were more evolved than we were. But what if we had kept going? What if things had been hard and the prairie dogs had to live? Maybe they could actually have created a society and been the evolutionarily dominant whatever. But this leads to the moral of the story, which is, kid, you better bootstrap your way up here, because if you have an easy life,
no civilization for you, Johnny.
Idle hands is the devil's work, is all I'm saying, is the vibe I got.
I just love that entire section of the book because it just delves into this alternate history where rats are the dominant species and they have their own rat civilization based on rat values. And all of this in a book about about a little mouse mother trying to heal her son. It's like, whoa, just gonna throw that in there on the side.
This isn't even a main character. I mean, Nicodemus is the main character, but it's such an interesting B plot. This shouldn't be the B plot. It feels like it gets backwards a little bit. Shouldn't saving little Timmy or Tommy or whatever his name is, shouldn't that be the B plot?
I did feel about that time in the book, it's like, wait a minute, whose story is this anymore? This feels more like the rat story than about Miss Frisby.
The title was accurate. It is Mrs. Frisby.
And
Mrs. Frisby gets half of the book. The Rats of NIMH get the other half. It meant it.
So just moving on, we're gonna mothball that. They move on and they find a dead guy in his truck.
They did. So they had to leave because whoever was on a honeymoon, and so they were coming back, so they left. And they find a dead guy, like you said, and then they find their truck. He was a toy maker.
Like a mobile toy maker.
Apparently, and he was camping in a national park, I think, or protected land or something or other. By the way, the National Institute of Mental Health is based in Maryland. I'm so used to us doing English stuff, but these are American rats, apparently. Freedom. But
yeah, these guys are up in them hollers. They're up in the hills.
But yeah, so they find this mobile toy. You know, we've reached a point where the more I say the plot out loud, the more ridiculous I feel. I gotta get you to listen to the Swindle episode, because Swindle was a book. It got turned into a TV Nickelodeon movie. And my husband was listening to the episode, and he paused it at one point and just looked at me. He's like, "You're making this up, right? Like, you're just being funny?" I was like, "No, that was the plot." That's how I feel right this moment, where I'm like, and so the rats found a toy truck and start taking all the parts from the toy truck, because now they're engineers and understand electricity and carpeting and human luxury.
And all the laws of physics.
And we might have hit my wall of, I have trash suspension of disbelief. All the other books, yeah, I can totally believe it, but we've hit my point, I guess. So they create this utopia for themselves in this rose bush that also connects to a bunch of other areas.
Complete with a rat elevator.
It has an elevator, not into water. I'd want to know why there's an entire swamp under the house, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, that's the movie, folks. That's the movie talking.
That is the movie, and I still don't understand. But I guess that might be one of the Bluethisms. I swear all of his movies have swamps in them.
Dude just loves water.
He has a lot of love for very specific tropes.
So we're finally out of the rat flashback.
Yes. And so he explains everything and whatnot. And so he explains that they're tired of stealing things, but they can't go back to living like rats. They're too intelligent. Rats think they're weird. Fair. And they don't want to keep living like they're living currently because they have electricity and carpet and stuff. But he's like, well, we have to keep stealing for it. And, you know, we're going to reach a point at some point where we can't keep stealing from them because it's going to make a huge dent. And they're no longer going to be like, oh, that's annoying. They're going to kill us, exterminate us. And so their plan is to go to a place called Thorn Valley, which is protected land that no one can get to because the mountains make it impossible to pass.
Yep, the plan of the Rats of NIMH.
And they're going to start a farming society, and they're going to farm and toil in the soil.
By the sweat of their brow. Do rats sweat?
Because if they become too complacent, then they stop developing evolutionary. I don't know. I get it, but here's where I get stuck. They're like, we never want to steal anything ever again. Anyway, so here's all the stuff we've stolen.
Yep, they kind of butterfly that by saying, you know, we're going to steal as much as possible now so that we never have to steal after this. It's kind of like the thieves who are like, one last job and then I'm going legit.
Mm-hmm.
If you throw anybody, even a human, out in the wilderness and you say, go farm, they're going to be like, can you give me some seeds?
Yeah, we need a little something.
Can I get like a rake or something?
And so they have all this food too, in case that it doesn't take the first time, which is smart, but it's just, I don't know. There was something missing for me when they're like, oh, we're going to work hard so we never have to steal ever again because these are our ideals and these are our beliefs and they're core beliefs for us. And it's all about integrity, man. Anyway, here's all the stolen stuff. Literally, that's what happens is they show her all of the food that they've stolen and talk about all the seeds and about moving it. That happens right after he says we don't want to steal anymore. It's a tone thing for me. What? Guys. Anyway, they totally skip over that in the movie.
Yep. And the final piece of the plan is they're going to destroy their entire civilization in the move.
Yes. So they can't come back and become complacent.
Yep. Burning the ships, so to speak.
Which comes to the biggest switch in the book and the movie. In the book, there's a rat named Jenner. He was a NIMH. He is a childhood best friend of Nicodemus. I swear Nicodemus is the same age as all the other rats. Why is he so freaking old in the movie? Why does Bluth make every old person scary? I think he needs to confront his inner turmoil and aging somewhere else. But that aside, Jenner decides, hey, I hate this. I don't want to work hard. We know how to do it. When you know better, you do better. Why are we trying to go backwards, essentially?
He did have some rat supremacy thoughts.
Yeah, he did. He was like, we're smart enough to do this, so... Although you come to find out they're not that smart, because the farmer is getting to the point where he's like, yeah, I'm going to exterminate them. So it wasn't going to work, Jenner.
Yep, and speaking of which, is this about the time we find out Jenner is dead?
It's a little later.
Yeah, spoiler alert, everybody, in the midst of our spoilers.
That we find out Jenner is dead. We find out Jenner is dead when Mrs. Frisby is kidnapped.
Gotcha.
So he just left with some groupies. They were like, hey, we hate this, we're leaving.
Yeah, like 6 or 7 other rats followed him, which is not a good sign because there were only 20 rats to start with.
True, but they've repopulated. They have wives, they have children now.
Yeah, that has always been a problem for me because there seems to be a whole bunch of rats and they started with 13. Where did they get the other rats?
I think about that all the time because they're like, oh, we can't live like normal rats. Anyway, here are these wives that have popped out of nowhere. You either had, and it doesn't mention any female rats in the group. There could have been female rats. We only learn about 3 of the 20. There could have been female rats. But
even if that were the case, they'd have to wait for the small rats to grow up, or there's a lot of weird marital implications in the growing rat population beneath the rosebush.
Yeah, and it's tricky. But now that I think about it, I think there were female rats, and that's the wives, because Nicodemus makes an exception when Jeremy's like, hey, I fell in love with this mouse. I met this cutie by the river. And he says, hey, she's gonna die. Have you considered that? And he's like, yeah, I have considered that. And so Nicodemus specifically saying that makes me think that the other rats married each other, but yeah, it's a little weird. But he takes about 6 to 8 other, there was 8 total, so I think he took 7 with him, and they just leave. You find out he's dead later. The movie decided that the scientists weren't villainy enough, completely cut their entire plot line, beside the, oh, we were kidnapped and shot, and then here's horrific scenes of rats being tortured. Beside that, completely gets cut. Jenner is there.
Front and villainous center.
Yes, and some questionable coloring choices because all the other rats are gray and white and brown and Jenner is black. Like...
Don't look too deep into that.
Let's... So, Jenner is there, he's evil, and he wants to kill Nicodemus because if he kills Nicodemus, he can convince them to all stay in the rosebush and whatever. So she comes, she's like, hey, I need help to move my family. They don't want to do it. Apparently there's council. And Jenner sees an opportunity to kill Nicodemus, so he agrees to help move him. Versus the book where she's like, hey, the owl said to do this thing. And they're like, okay, we'll do this thing.
Yeah, it was almost like instant agreement where it's like, oh yeah, that'll take about a day.
Okay, we'll get started. No one complained. No one said no.
Yeah, they just nose to the grindstone, these rats.
Nicodemus was like, hey, we're doing this thing, and all the rats were like, okay.
Yeah, just lockstep. I kind of enjoyed that about the book.
I did too.
They're just men on a mission, you know?
I just like the way the rats are treated in the book. You can tell they're different, but I don't know. There's some books where once you gain intelligence, you lose empathy, which I don't think that's always the most accurate. There are absolutely people that are extremely learned and are just atrocious human beings. But I kind of like a learned society that becomes more empathetic because they've read poetry and have empathy for other situations, because it's a very human thing to gain lessons and emotional experiences from other people's story. Is something that separates us from animals, is that we're able to learn from others' mistakes. And so they've learned how to do that. And they've read poetry, they've read history, they've learned science. They're like, hey, we've learned all these things. That's helped us develop empathy. So I kind of like that. The rats in the movie were jerks.
Yeah, I'll go back to what I said. Of the two likable characters in that movie, it's only Miss Frisby herself and Justin.
It's Miss Frisby for me. Justin was so obviously set up as this archetype. I couldn't.
I dig the hero archetype. He's a good guy.
He had nothing to provide to the genre, to me.
I mean, he's lackluster compared to the book.
Oh my gosh, the book was so much better.
Yep, we'll get to that. Because in the meantime, in order to move Mrs. Frisby's house, the cat dragon needs to be taken care of.
Yes, and I liked how the book does this better. Because in the movie, she reads a notebook and learns immediately, oh, my husband died by trying to drug the cat. And I told my husband that I hated that too. Because in the book, you learn, hey, we're friends of your husband. You start to learn some of the story. It's taken in two parts.
It's kind of drip fed.
Yeah. And so we get to the point where they're like, hey, here's some complications we're going to have. We can move the stuff. We're able to do that. But it's going to cause a lot of noise, which is going to attract the attention of Dragon. So what we normally would do is drug the cat food. But the problem is none of the rats can do it because the hole is too small. And she immediately is like, I'll do it. I'll do this right now. I'll do the thing. I'll be the mom. I'll do whatever I need to do for Timothy. How was that? Having a namesake in the book, by the way.
I tend to ignore my own name.
Fair enough. So I'll do whatever for Timothy. And they're like, no, you don't understand how dangerous it is. Not only is Mr. Ages in the cast because he did it, but your husband died doing this mission. And you're just like, whoa. The weight of that just kind of hits you. And you're like, oh my gosh. And it just raises the stakes in a way where she becomes even more courageous. She's like, no one else can do this. It's for my kids. I will do the thing. Yeah, in the movie, she's like, oh, I might, walks off a really long shot of her walking up and Nicodemus staring into your soul because he had to be facing the audience for this whole awkward 10 seconds of her pretending to walk off and then deciding to run back to be like, I volunteer as tribute. So the book did it better. So she's going to do the thing. They get her there. They're like, hey, here's the stuff. There's going to be a stool here. There's going to be the cat dish here. There's going to be this, that, and the other thing. She's going to give him the food, open the door. The cat's going to come in. So from her putting the bowl down to going to the floor to open the door is your chance to get in there, drug it, get out. And she's like, okay. She gets up there. She looks around. She notices that the stool is moved. And she's like, ooh, should I abandon the mission? Something's weird here. She's like, no. She talks herself out of it. She's like, no, I need to do the mission. Just she moved it. You know, people move furniture all the time. It's fine. Runs, does the thing, runs back, almost there, gets caught in a column dish.
By Billy.
By Billy.
Billy, the farmer's kid.
The younger son. He's 12. Fun fact, we got some ages here. So he decides, hey, I want to keep it. Apparently, this is really the morbid part where I was like, wow, as an adult, that seems really, really, really dark. They had a bird as a pet and he died. They don't say how. They just say, oh, yeah, we had a yellow canary that recently died. That was really ominous. Was that ominous for you? I just made it sound like bad pet owners vibes. Like, oh my gosh, you're going to get murdered. That was very ominous to me. Anyway, so she's in a birdcage and she remembers that story. Oh yeah, this is how Nicodemus and the rats got out, right? So she's going to do that, but the latch is too heavy because she is a mouse, which is fair. And so Justin ends up rescuing her. They changed that in the movie. And the only reason I'm kind of glad they changed it in the movie, first of all, I think it's cool that she can get herself out, period. But I feel like there were so many points in the book where she was so kick butt and awesome that the movie had to give her that moment. Because if they didn't, I don't know, she's just so quiet spoken and shy and stammering that she had to have this rockin' moment to do the character any decency.
I can feel that. Oh, and this is when she learns about Jenner and the whole plan of the scientists.
Yes. So it works out that she got kidnapped because at dinner, the dad is like, hey, I went to the hardware store and they blew a fuse. And I had to remind myself that this was written in the 70s because for some reason it's like farmland, 1910. What's power? What's electricity? I don't know. They stole an outlet. What is wrong with me? They have Christmas lights. Anyway, blew a fuse and whatever. He's like, yeah, I found these 8 rats. And it's like they were trying to move the generator, but they're rats. That's crazy. And then this reporter guy was like, mechanized rats, moving stuff, craziness. And the farmer's like, well, that's a leap. Okay. You find they're mechanized or whatever. Well, NIMH starts poking around, supposedly, is confirmed later, but starts poking around, and it's bad because the rats have already said, if we're ever found again, we will either be put in a cage forever. They don't bring this up, but I'll bring it up. They might be killed so they can study what their bodies are, or they'll destroy them because they're far too intelligent. Horrible either way. So it's really bad that now they're going to be poking around because the farmer's like, yeah, we have some rats. They're kind of weird. I mean, I don't really know what you guys want, but he thinks they're just there to exterminate rats because of rabies. So he's like, cool, free rat extermination, because he mentions, hey, they've been taking too much food. This way I don't have to pay for it myself. And the wife is upset. She's like, no, my rose bush. And he's like, it's okay. I'll buy you a rose bush and a lilac bush. I mean, fair.
Yep. She still cries when the rose bush is taken down.
It's emotional. Rose bushes are very, very intensive. So here's the problem. Justin comes and rescues her when they're asleep, gets out. She tells the rats that NIMH is coming, which sucks because they had basically a week and they could have moved all the stuff, but they're going to have to go that night because NIMH is coming. And so they get out there, they move the house, they keep their promise, which good for you guys. I appreciate that. They keep their promise, they move her house, everything is good. Except when the rats go to move the house, one of our little friends is there.
And who could it possibly be?
And Madame Shrew, her name's literally, they don't give her a name, she just refers to her as Shrew. And she is old. But the Shrew is telling them, they think that they're trying to steal the house.
The entire house.
The entire house. So she's protecting the children. So, I mean, kind of the neighbor you want, in that she was gonna go down for those kids. She was like, I don't believe you. You've done something to Mrs. Frisby. She's hurt and whatever. So Mrs. Frisby has to show up and clarify, and it's fine, but whatever. But it was just like, I don't know. A part of me is like, you're being a bit of a Karen. But the other part of me is like, but from her point of view, that is pretty sketchy. All the rats that have been doing strange stuff just show up and are like, yeah, we're moving the house. Something that makes no sense to a creature like her who just moves. So I kind of have some respect for her. It's completely destroyed by the movie, but I kind of have respect for her. And they move the house, everything's fine. They go back to the house. And here's the sad part that totally gets cut from the movie. They're coming and they're like, well, they need to find a rat's nest. So 10 rats decide that they're going to stay back and scurry and make it look like a whole bunch of rats. Because I think there's about 40 of them at this point. And of course, Justin volunteers and Brutus does, and 8 other rats. So their plan is once they start getting gassed or whatever they're going to do, that they're going to run around, look like a bunch of rats fleeing, and then they've destroyed the passageways to the good stuff. So it's just going to look like a normal rat's nest instead of, super intelligent creatures. Well, 8 of them get out, and then a 9th one. And I was like, oh, there's Justin.
Brutus, right?
Yeah, it's Brutus.
And Brutus was helped out of that cave of deadly gas by an unknown rat who went back in to help someone else.
Yep. So 2 rats end up dying. This other rat, so I guess 7 escaped, and the 8th was Brutus. And he explains he doesn't know who it was, but they pushed him out, got him out of the hole, and he went back for the other one. Can't say who it was, but a very brave rat did it and ended up dying. And so it's ambiguous to the point where Martin, when he finally learns the story, decides that when he gets older, he's going to go to NIMH to find out if Justin died or not.
Not NIMH, go to Thorn Valley.
Thorn Valley, that's right.
Yep, and by the way, the rats are just gone now in the story.
Oh yeah, they're gone. And so they wait until little Timmy is better, then they go to their summer house, and then they hang out with people, and then she tells the kids the story. The end.
The end. Happy ending. Continued on in 2 more books.
We'll get to the 2 other books in a minute. But the movie. Magic?
Magic.
Magic. Magic.
Magic.
Where did it come from?
Turn a bunch of rats with PhDs into medieval sorcerers.
but only one of them.
Yep, they weren't even like, one of those science is magic kind of things. No, he just straight up levitates things.
No, and I remember asking my husband, I was like, oh, so the scientists made them magic instead of making them intelligent or whatever? And he's like, no, it's never explained.
Yeah.
And then what's never explained? Magic.
Yeah, there's just magic. Magic rats. No explanation needed. And if I remember right, Don Bluth's reason for doing this was basically just kids' movies should be magical. And that's his reason.
I hate it. Yeah, your dinosaurs didn't need magic.
The one thing about Don Bluth's movies that I did not remember until I watched one was that I did not remember how bouncy everybody talked.
It's obnoxious.
It's like everybody's got rubber bands around their jaws.
And their movements, they're bouncy too. Like if you watch their walking animations.
The whole thing is very dynamic in every way. Just non-stop, just movement. Movement
and action. He had to add so many action scenes. He added that she's the one that destroyed the tractor while it was moving. Okay.
Yeah, instead of them just taking the tractor out 10 feet to see if it works, they were going to do it that day.
They were plowing. They were in the process. And so she goes up there and cuts the fuel line instead of it being some sort of pin that rusted and they're like, okay, we need a new part.
Not even her. Not even Miss Frisby.
Oh yeah, wasn't it the shrew?
The shrew.
Just pops up and is like, hey, yeah.
Yeah, the shrew of all characters, little 3-paragraph shrew in the entire book, has this big heroic scene of disabling the farmer's plow.
I am not kidding when I say that Bluth wanted his money. His money's worth those two characters. The crow, he's worked with a bunch, and then he worked with her a bunch. And so the crow and shrew just kept getting scenes, and I hated it. The crow gets a love interest, and I'm like, that's the ending, is the crow gets a love interest, and I hate it.
Also, there's a magic amulet. It is not explained, this magic amulet.
Is it Jonathan's? I don't know. Where'd they get it? I don't know. Did they have it before NIMH? No. Did they have it escaping NIMH? No. Nicodemus just has it. And it was carved.
Yeah, it just exists. And Nicodemus, the wizard, gives it to Miss Frisby and says, only true courage will activate it, or some nonsense.
True courage of heart is rare to find. And yeah, I have to be next to your heart to work, basically. You have to wear me.
Yep.
So there's the action scene there. The crow gets tied up in string instead of the tinsel, which I think takes away from the environmental lesson. But he's trying to get string. He gets tied up with it because he wants to make a love nest, because he wants to get a chick.
In more ways than one.
To show you how unnecessary this creature is, the day that they're moving the house, Mrs. Frisby says, hey, get as much string as you can to help them. And the crow doesn't show up till the next day when it's moved. And he shows up and he's like, here's all the string I have. It's this one, this one, this one. Oh no, your house has already been moved. What is he doing here?
Yeah, and of the book, he has maybe one important scene, which is getting her to and from the owl, and that is all he's needed for.
And the tinsel.
And in the movie, it kind of shows that, because in every other scene that he's in, he is absolutely not needed.
It's not. She goes into the rose bush, and he's just there to almost wake up the cat. He just keeps popping up for no reason.
Yeah, and then he goes to the kids, and he gets tied up by the shrew. There's the shrew again. And then the kids kind of torture him with tickling until he tells them that she's in the rose bush. And I was thinking, oh, the kids are going to go in the rose bush. They don't. They do nothing with this information.
I have gaslit myself. I swear to goodness that when I was looking up this movie, one of the pictures was the kids riding. Yeah, there's the kids riding on the crow.
Deleted scene, maybe. I don't know.
That doesn't happen in the movie. And I can send it to you right now to prove my point. And so I thought at some point he was going to become important. He would have to save the kids or whatever. And then we were like, oh, well, maybe it's the second movie. But the second movie's freaking the other guy.
Timmy to the rescue, yeah. And all throughout the first book, by the way, audience, all throughout the first book, you're kind of giving hints that little Tim is really smart.
Yes.
Like his dad, but he's also very sick and kind of fragile. So he's this glass cannon.
Yes. Anyway, the point is unnecessary, but keeps getting added because he wanted to get his money's worth out of this voice actor that he likes.
Also, I finally get to talk about my favorite scene. My eyes went to dinner plates and I actually had to close them again and just laugh. And it's right when Miss Frisby, goes to put the sleeping powder in Dragon's food and she gets captured and Justin sees it. He's like, are we allowed to curse in this podcast?
Oh yeah! He uses a minor curse word in the children's movie. You know how PG-13, you always are like, where's your F-bomb? Where is it? Where's your one? Well, he got one curse word.
Yeah, he just is like, cuss. I'll have to come back later. And he never does.
He never does!
But I just laughed so hard.
I thought about that, because as she was rescuing herself, I was like, Justin has to show up. Like, he just said, I gotta come back later. And he doesn't. You're right. Now that you mention it, yeah. He's like, structure that holds back water. I'll have to come back later. And then he doesn't. And then he doesn't become important until later, where she gets out. She goes, tells the rats, by the way, Nicodemus is dead because Jenner killed him.
He crushed him with a cinder block.
And then it was like, the children are trapped. Well, sucks to suck. Anyway, back to the rose bush. This man is unhinged. None of the rats say anything, by the way, in this whole scene. This is how unhinged it is. He's like, well, sucks to suck. Anyway, we can't do anything. Let's go back to the rose bush. Mrs. Frisby shows up and she's like, hey, men of NIMH are coming. And they're like, oh no, what if it's true? And he's like, no, it's not true. She lies. And she's like, I swear I'm not lying.
Yeah, and then the mighty backhand of Jenner.
He hits her and then pulls out her sword and starts attacking her. And no one does anything.
Yeah, by the way, for how advanced these rats are in the book, I expect them to have, gunpowder. And then in the movie, it's back to sword and magic.
A little bit. And he has a squiggly sword because he's evil.
Yeah, he has the Shan Yu sword from Mulan. You can tell how evil he is by the number of ridges.
And I cannot stress, they are surrounded by rats when this is happening, but oh no, Justin, who's also standing surrounded by rats, is the one who has to come in and start fighting him off with a stick. Someone finally throws him his sword. No one else is doing anything. This is so unhinged. Can you imagine? You walk up to someone and you're having a minor argument with them. It's a mild inconvenience where she says, hey, the men of NIMH are here. You're going to get killed. And he's like, no, they're not. And then some people will pull up, what if she's telling the truth? And he's like, no, they're lying. And she's like, I swear I'm not. Sword.
Yeah.
Let me murder you in front of everyone else. And then they'll totally believe that the men of NIMH aren't coming.
Yeah, also, by the way, during this fight, Jenner sees the necklace around Miss Frisby's neck. And he's like, I want that stone. We don't know why he wants it. We don't know why it's important. We don't know why it would even work with him having it because he's not courageous.
He makes it sound like it's a birthright. The Crow's obsessed with it. Jenner's obsessed with it.
Secret villain Crow.
Also, on a side note, the way, I swear to goodness, it gave my husband thought the exact same thing, so I'm not crazy. There's a moment when they're in the stupid bayou or whatever, and she loses the packet. She's freaking out. He hands it over to her. And he's about to leave, go wherever. And then all of a sudden, he pops back on the rock, and she is on her back, and he is over her.
His whole body.
Wings on either side of her, and it was so uncomfortable until I want the necklace and whatever, and he's being creepy about it, and she's like, no, you're not getting it, and he goes off. And I turned to my husband and he looked back at me and he was like, that felt very SAE. I was like, that's exactly what I thought. That was so uncomfortable. Why would you animate it like that? Oh my goodness. So yeah, they've been obsessing over this stupid necklace of mysterious origins. And here's the thing. They're lifting the house up and Jenner cuts the rope so it'll fall and kill Nicodemus because he wants to stay in the rose bush. And the house ends up falling in mud and the children are trapped inside and it starts sinking. And I turned to my husband and I said, some of the other action scenes are really contrived and whatever. It's fine. I actually kind of like this one. And he shakes his head and he's just like, wait a minute. I'm like, okay. And then it keeps going and whatever. They're trying to do the ropes and whatever. I'm like, okay, it's getting kind of drawn out. they're all dead by now, but we still have like another minute of them acting like they're going to get it out. And then I pointed out, but what are they going to do? Even if they raised it out of mud, it's not like water. How are you going to get all the mud out? They're still trapped in mud. They're still not breathing. Whatever. They fall into the thing. And I was just like, okay, well, what are you going to do now? Magic
amulet.
Magic amulet. She touches the rope. The cinder block comes out of the mud. All the mud drives away, and she puts it in a tree? I don't even know where that went. It wasn't on the other side of the stone, though. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, that whole scene where it's like, okay, there's so much unnecessary about this movie, Mr. Don Bluth.
And you cut good stuff to add junk.
I'm so glad I read the book first.
It was definitely an experience. It's not surprising. I have my own qualms with other children's beloved classic movies, Wizard of Oz, Cough. But like I said, I'm not mad. I'm not like, well, why did you even buy the rights? This sucks. This isn't even the movie. That is nothing. Like it, you can see the book in there. It has enough of the originality. It really does feel like he bought and was like, I can write it better.
Yeah.
And then he just made the most baffling decisions of, if I didn't know his religious affiliations and that he felt very strongly about them, I would have assumed he was on acid.
It's just an odd movie all throughout. And it's worse if you've read the book.
It's so bizarre. And it's the 80s, so it's the time for acid. You know, LSD, mushrooms, shrooms. No, that was just his personality.
Oh, goodness gracious. But yeah, and the movie ends with her saying that Justin lived in this version, and she gave him the amulet.
Oh yeah, Justin lived and gave him the amulet for... How did you do that? It was supposedly a connection to your dead husband.
Yeah, weird.
You don't have the rats now. You might need magic.
Yeah, and also, you might need it against the crow, who really wanted it.
He really wanted it.
But like you said earlier, he gets his love interest at the end.
It ends with him getting a love interest. And I was like, great. I'm so glad they got together, because it's one of those things where you look at two people that you dislike or you hate, and then they start dating each other, and you're like, this is actually a good thing. So no one else has to date those two people. They have been taken off the market, and no one has to worry about them. That's kind of how I felt. I was like, cool, two idiots have found each other.
And now for our portion of Timothy to the Rescue.
No, I watched the trailer.
No, we didn't watch that.
And I don't understand, and I told my husband this, I literally don't understand why cheap, low-budget movies become musicals. Like, that seems like too much effort.
No.
Did you not know? It is a musical.
No, it was not a musical.
It absolutely is a musical.
No.
They even brag about it in the trailer, and he sings a song about how he hopes one day he'll be the son that his dad has always saw in him.
I'm glad our cameras are off. That's
real.
There has to be some kind of German word for pain emanating outward from the soul.
There probably is. Yeah, it's a musical. And so is Fiverr Goes West, by the way.
Fifel, yeah.
That's just facts. It has a 7.5 on Amazon, by the way, which is very interesting, because 7.5, average. It's probably fine, but there's probably a couple things where you're like, I wouldn't watch this every day. Going from the first movie to the second movie, do you want to know what the second movie's rating is on Amazon Prime?
I think you said somewhere in the 3s, right?
3.5.
That's higher than I thought it was.
That is an accomplishment. There are some times where, like, oh yeah, if you see a bunch of 1-star reviews, you're like, okay, this made people angry, or whatever. It's like when you get like a 7 on a quiz, and you just look at it, and it's like, it would have made more sense if you got a 0. But you had to do something. You had to work to get a 7. That's how I feel about this movie.
It is the most average, sub-average movie.
And the animation is terrible and cheap, and it looks pretty bad. But yeah, it's a musical. And I just wonder why cheap movies just always become musicals. Is it easier? Do they need to pad out the runtime that bad? But I mean, to come up with a song, period, seems like more work. But anyway, beside the point, general thoughts. How No, we're just going to stop there. How? What?
I liked the book.
I liked the book. I didn't like it enough to want to go buy it, which is how I feel about Watership Down, and I already own Redwall. But I was kind of like a little meh on it, like, oh yeah, I have to make sure my child... This won a Newbery, by the way, a Newbery Award. But if we were in the library and checking out books, and I was like, oh yeah, that book, like I'd check it out and read to him then, but I wouldn't necessarily own it. Does that make sense in the hierarchy of books?
Oh yeah, no. A book that you wouldn't buy, but you would read if it was available.
For free.
Yeah.
If my barrier to entry was real low, I'd read it again. And like I said, there's definitely some interesting conservation things to look at with like the tinsel and some of the farmer stuff, and definitely with animal testing, and could have a really interesting conversation with a kid, be like, well, the history of animal testing, why it's extensive. And so we could have a really good conversation of like, this is something that happens, this is something that still happens, and it's a good introduction to animal testing, which is a very complicated subject, but it's a good way to start talking about it. So I wouldn't mind talking to him about that. But back cover, though.
It'll haunt you.
As long as I don't own it.
Yep.
Possess Mrs. Frisby can't hurt me.
Yep. I know a few books like that I choose not to purchase, even though I like them, because there's something wicked going on, and I refuse to have that in my house.
With that cover! You're just asking for trouble.
General thoughts for me is, I enjoyed it being sci-fi. I enjoyed rats with PhDs trying to philosophize themselves into what a rat civilization would look like. And I enjoyed the A story of this caring, loving mother, this kind of humble figure in a world larger than herself.
And she's courageous and strong and intelligent, a little bit sarcastic.
Yeah.
But you love her for it.
Yeah, she's just a good character.
And they do kind of make her a little too timid in the movie.
She's a strong, independent woman who did not want to be.
Did not want to be a single mom, which is fair. But I think she was probably always a very strong, independent woman, and he was a strong, independent man, and then they came together and made a great family together.
And made a son that would rescue...
Shut up.
Ending that there, no.
No, it's General Thoughts. Let's talk about this. So I looked it up because you recommended this, and the first thing I do is I go on Goodreads to see if there's more. Well, I looked into the history of the books. There are 3 books in the Rats of NIMH series, but the author only wrote one of them. That is this book. He went on to write a bunch of other stuff. He wrote a lot of kids' books, and then later in life he wrote adult books, and a lot of them were award-winning. This one, like I said, got the Newbery Award, so I'm sure there's some elementary schools teaching it because, you know, Newbery Award. Well, after he died, his daughter took over and wrote 2 and 3. So, do they count? I don't know. Is she a good writer? Because it could go either way.
Yeah, you know, sometimes that really is a question, isn't it? Because I know there's the whole death of author thing, but there is always like a canon.
This could either be she's a good author that just grew up in that world and wanted to write about it and she had the rights to it so she could do it. Or it could read like some really rough fan fiction. Because fan fiction can be good. She could have written good fan fiction, or she could have written really bad fan fiction, but she had the rights, so she could publish it.
And if I remember right, I looked at the Wikipedia, just browsed it for the other books, and I think the second book is like the son of Jenner.
Is it?
Yeah.
Because the movie is definitely Timothy.
I'm gonna limit myself to this book because I did enjoy it. I don't want to ruin the magic, and it's not magic, it's science.
That's the thing. First of all, I had a hard enough time sourcing the first book. I managed to find it at a nearby library. There is no way. Here's an example of how niche book 2 and 3 are. Book 2 came out in 1986, 4 years after the movie. The second one came out in 1990. Do you know how many ratings Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH has on Goodreads?
How many?
180,872. Do you want to know how many Rasco and the Rats of NIMH, which is the second book, has? 4,005.
I read a lot of obscure books. My Goodreads is rather tainted.
R.T. Margaret and the Rats of NIMH, which is the third book where the rats help children, has 903.
Man.
I'm not finding these books in a library, is all I'm saying. They are nowhere. There's no way I could source those. I don't even know on Amazon levels of obscurity.
You'd have to either drop some cash or try to find something through interlibrary loan.
Where? Where would they borrow that from? Who has bought these books? What library is keeping a book from 1986 that you know is never getting checked out? No one's checking that out. They've definitely cycled that through by now. Yeah, no, I agree. We're stopping here because there's no way. I'm sure the daughter is a gem of a person, but we're stopping here. One question for the author. I would like to hear more about why he started in children's fiction and why he later moved on to adult. Because his adult fiction was also award-winning. He's a very impressive author, award-wise. So I would just be curious in that transition of, was it a personal life thing and he decided to go with that? Or did he feel, I don't know, did he feel trapped by the conventions of children's literature and that's why he moved up to adult? Or was it, you know, it could be a number of things. He could have just been like, hey, let's see if I can do that. Could have been a lot of reasons. So I would be curious about that transition and what he has to say about it.
My question would be, do you know or did you know at the time of any other books that had rats as protagonists? Because even growing up in the age before, you know, mass mice protagonist books, the furry little creatures genre really hasn't had, even in, like, you know, from the medieval ages on, none of the anthropomorphized animals, even in Aesop's tales, have rats as heroes.
Yeah.
And so is this a new thing that you did, or were you inspired? Did you even care to think about it?
Of the books that we have read, which is Watership Down and Redwall, this is the earliest book we have read.
Whoa.
So all of the other books have come after this one. Watership Down was published 2 years after this. So I wonder if it's not so much what inspired him or if he inspired Redwall or Watership Down, or in any case, any sort of way.
But yeah, that's the question.
Rating, I would give this Watching a Tractor Till Farm out of 10. It wasn't high impact adventure, which the movie desperately wanted it to be, and it's just not. Shout out to Bluth being obsessed with runaway scenes with the sky being red, Land Before Time flashbacks. But it was calming. It was a lot of conversation, so it felt like you were just sitting there watching it kind of happen. Just chilling, and it's kind of satisfactory to watch him, but if it's not high impact, it's kind of a cozy fantasy. Obviously there's some traumatic things, but even the traumatic things aren't action-packed, huge, major, in your face, you know, no cannibal bunnies, no sword fight to the end looking at you, both Redwall and the movie. There was no high impact adventure moments. It was just calming. It was about a rat who lives in a field.
I would give this book a safely placed house in the lee of the stone out of 10. And I think there is a difference between a safe book, one that kind of is able to skirt any of the original ideas and just make sure it's mass marketable. This is a good book. It is a safe book in a different way. It makes you think, really, it gives you the room to think about things. It has lovable characters. I think it's a good book for kids to read. It's definitely one of those beginner novels where you're finally stepping out on your own.
Oh yeah, you definitely have some conversations. And I've spent a lot of time on animal testing, but you know, there's other conversations you can have. Is the only life worth living one that's hard work, and what do we leave for our children, and
how self-sufficient should you be?
How cushy should you make their lives?
Yep. And how far are you willing to go for your own family? And what I like about this book is there's no chosen one.
No, it's a group effort. Every member of the team is important. And so it has that underdog American storytelling that we're obsessed with. There's an underdog and does a thing, but Mrs. Frisby has a part to play. Justin has a part to play. Nicodemus has a part to play. Mr. Ages has a part to play. Jeremy has a part to play. And they all play their roles very well, and they come together to create something bigger, you know, synergy, bigger than themselves. And it's really good. It has a collectivism message in there, which I think is healthy for such an independent society as we are, to have a little bit of, but what about the society? What about other people?
Yeah, what's the greater good here? And I liked it in that even with the syringes, even with the medical testing and that, it wasn't Spike the guy and he builds Captain America muscles.
And I took issue with the movie. I know you're making it fast, but it was like they were basically torturing the rats. They give them a shot and you see them in agony. The book takes a very, this is what animal testing is. I feel like the criticism isn't hyperbolic or over the top. I feel like it's fair criticism.
And I like that the rats actually had to work even with all of the adjustments. It's that it didn't make them intelligent, it gave them the ability to be intelligent.
Read again, like I said, maybe. I'm not against reading again, but I'm not about to go rush out there to read it again.
Yeah, I could wait a standard number of years before reading this again. Not because it's bad, but because it is memorable, but also it's a safe book.
Yeah, I could live my entire life without reading it again. I could read it again in a couple of years. We'll see. But have you read this book? If you could be a woodland creature, what would you be? Do you have any book recommendations for us? Tell us all about it in the comments below. If you like the video, hit like. And if you're enjoying yourself, hit subscribe for more. Thank you for exploring Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH with us.
Join us next time when we'll be covering Rivals by Catherine McGee.
I'm Sam Reiner.
And I'm Tim Bergman.
And we hope to see you and a friend here next time. Escape With Me Book Club is a Lunar Skulk production. Check us out on TikTok or Instagram to keep up to date with us. Lunar_SKULK.